one and only author, founding director of the Women's Prize for Fiction, Kate Mosse, who will look after us.
Kate Mosse and friends, obviously, because otherwise that would be a bit of a letdown. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It is wonderful to be back here doing the Bailey's Book Bar, but in a new venue. It's fabulous to be here. Bailey's was the title sponsor for many years, and we've now changed our structure and we have other sponsors as well. But our beloved Bailey's has stayed as part of it, and it's the Bailey's Book Bar. And we set this up in partnership with the team at Bailey's, realising that we wanted to celebrate the astonishing shortlist that came out every year. But we also realised that many of you would not have read those books yet. That's the point of the shortlist. So what we decided to do was set up a range of events all this week, and we've done this for the past few years, where brilliant other women come and talk about books that matter to them. And everything about the Women's Prize is about amplifying women's voices. It's about honouring women's achievements. It's about saying to people that you care about, try this, it's fantastic. And if you don't like that book, try another one. Because let me say, there are so many brilliant books by women in the world that you will never get through them all. And when you've got through them, then you can try some of the chaps' books. So I am Kate Mosse, and I'm the founder director, and I'm going to be hosting it this evening. And tonight we're kicking off with Women, Power and Revolution. That was half-hearted, frankly. And also how to do Women, Power and Revolution when you're really, really tired. I think is probably it. So I'm going to just introduce the panel to you, and then we're going to go along, and each of the guests are going to talk about two books that they feel fits that brief. And then we will chat as if you're not there, and then we will have a few questions from the audience. There are two things I must say, housekeeping, before we go. Firstly, we're lucky enough to have some photographers here, so we have a record of the event. So if anybody doesn't want to be photographed, could you either put your hand up so we avoid you, or, I don't know, go sit on the floor or something. I don't know, because you'll probably be got in. And also, I'm delighted to say that we are being broadcast live on the Facebook, Waterstone's Facebook channel. So, yes, no swearing. No. So that's a fantastic way, again, of reaching many readers, many women and men who can't join us here tonight. And again, that's all about making sure that exceptional books by women get out to as many readers as possible. So, Kit de Waal. Kit has, I think it's fair to say, taken the publishing industry by storm in the last few years. She's an award-winning writer and an advocate, particularly for working-class voices, but also for high-quality fiction that delivers that sort of message, if you like. Her debut novel, My Name is Leon, which is a wonderful book that I'm sure everybody's read, was shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award, longlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize, and won the Kerry Group Irish Novel of the Year for 2017. And her second, The Trick to Time, which is over there, is just the most exclusive, exactly there, beautiful, exquisite, reflective novel. And it was longlisted for the prize this year. Sadly didn't make the shortlist, but we all agree that Kit's reaction to that on Twitter was the most elegant response to anybody. And Kit will maybe explain what she did later, or just all follow her on Twitter, and then you will have a spike. So thank you very much, Kit. And the final thing to say is that her anthology, Common People, an anthology of working-class writers, is going to be coming out soon, and it's one of the fastest ever books on the crowdfunding website, Unbound. I mean, it went like that. So, and I don't understand how you can be 120% funded. I mean, that's all wrong, isn't it? But anyway, or something like that. So sitting next to her is Catherine Mayer. Catherine is a former journalist with, so many credits that you'll just have to go onto her website to see all of them. But most recently, editor-at-large for Time magazine in Europe, and has an enormous reputation within Europe as well as within the UK for investigative, complicated, serious journalism. She is obviously a writer, and I'll come on to her books, but she's also the co-founder and president of the Women's Equality Party and is shamelessly advertising herself on her T-shirt, which is absolutely
the only time you will see me thrust my non-existent.
I see. Start as we mean to go on. The tone has dropped immediately. And her books include The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, How Gender Equality Can Save the World, which actually Catherine's going to talk about tonight, a best-selling biography of Prince Charles. And, of course, we are very grateful because this year she is one of the Women's Prize for Fiction judges. And that is for no slouch. You can't be a slouch to do that. So, June, welcome back.
Good to be back.
June Sarpong, MBE, is one of the most recognisable faces on television and indeed voices on radio, and has that rare balance of being a host, a presenter and a panellist for shows such as Channel 4's Loose Women, and is obviously an extraordinary interviewer. And her subjects are amazing. You know, they range from Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, George Clooney, that links back to Kit, and she's still going to explain it later, Prince Charles, which links back to Catherine. It's almost as if this was planned. And 50 Cent. June released her first book, Diversify, 6 Degrees of Integration, last year to great acclaim. And her next, The Power of Women, is out in
August.
In August. And last year, June kindly took part in one of our Women's Prize for Fiction panel events. She's so blooming good, we got her back. We snuck her back in. And finally, Kate Williams. We are thrilled to have Kate here because some of you who've been watching the television will have noticed Kate, royal correspondent, has been outside that hospital talking about that birth, and then was in Parliament Square talking about that statue. So we weren't even sure that you were going to be able to make it. But Kate is a historian, broadcaster, professor of history and a novelist. And her 8th novel, The House of Shadows, which is the 3rd in a wonderful trilogy following the storms of war and the edge of the fall, comes out in July. And as I said, Kate is regular on the television screens. And I feel that it is a rather wonderful thing that in this particular week, where for once the birth of a prince doesn't put a princess down the pecking order. And today there is a statue for the first time ever of a woman in Parliament Square, which is both ludicrous and brilliant. I feel that the Women's Prize for Fiction has just got its timing right. So, ladies, I'm going to start with you, Kit, because I can see you at the end. Can you tell us the first book you've chosen for Women, Power and Revolution and why?
Okay, so I've chosen The Last Bad Man by Miranda July. I don't know if anyone's read it, but Miranda July, first of all, I mean, it's part of the reason I chose it is because it's her. She's an activist, she's a feminist, she's a filmmaker, she's a sculptor, she's a writer, she's an actress. She's a really kick-ass woman, I hope I can say that. It's not really swearing, is it? She's kick-ass, and she has written this book. I don't think it's the first book, I think she had a book of short stories first. But this book is an unapologetic look at the pressure on women, on this particular woman in the book, to have the marriage, to have the baby, to have the home, to have all the things that we all, society tells us we should have. And so this woman creates in her mind the fantasy family, the fantasy engagement, the fantasy proposal, all that. And then it's what really happens in her life. So that fantasy is sort of running here. And then here is her own life. And the two, I mean, they don't converge, they sort of do this throughout the book. It's absolutely fantastic. It's like nothing I've ever read. So as you're turning the page, you go, really? And it takes a while to realise that there's a fantasy world and a real world. It's so good and it's so unusual. It's like no other book I've ever read.
How did you come across it? How did
Someone
it come
recommended
to
it to me, and
right.
when first 3 pages, I was like, oh God, I've got to read this now because my friend's recommending it to me. I did not enjoy it. It's not what I normally read. And then at the end, it's one of those where I think, who can I give this book to? You. You know, I was a fan. And I read a lot about it because it was so out of my comfort zone, so out of my genre. But just so refreshingly unique. You know, you couldn't say that this writer had written anything like anything else. It's hard to describe, actually, what the book's like, because it's this stream of consciousness. But there's 2 stream of consciousnesses consciousness eye. Is that the right word? And they're sort of just doing this throughout the book. Fantastic. I really, really recommend it to people.
And is it quiet revolution? Is that what you feel? What you know, choosing it for power and revolution, is that because it's someone refusing to play the role?
Yes. So the woman, the protagonist in this book, is not for a moment going up against society. Society comes up against her, if you like. She wants to have the really traditional woman's role, and she can't.
Right.
And so it's about, what else am I going to do? And she has this weird life that she starts to like. Hey, you know, this is okay. She gets a lodger, and she sort of has an affair with the lodger, and the lodger's a bit of a creep. And it's a woman. The lodger's a woman. She's like, never ever considered that, because she's got to have the most traditional. And it's like, actually, you know, it's okay. And they get together, and there's some weird scenes where they act out this fantasy of, imagine if there was a break-in, there'd be two bad men, and you'd have to do that to the first bad man, and I'd do that. You know, how weird is that? Yeah. And that's why it's called The First Bad Man. It's, you know, it's a really odd book, and I really, really recommend it.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, I think you've sold that one. That's
Yeah, you have.
Right, Catherine, your first book, weird, powerful.
The weird bit is that I've chosen my own book.
I think that shows proper confidence.
Well,
and,
I actually thought that was a slightly revolutionary thing to do.
Absolutely.
But it's also when I was asked, you know, books about revolution and power, the reason I wrote this book is because I went looking for a book that would tell me certain things. I had accidentally started a political party, which is a very careless thing to do. And I was at that point where I was having to go out and advocate for revolution. So I wanted to know why it was that, you know, this was 2015 where I'd started the party. Why were we this far into the, this far along in history and still nowhere near equality? What were the mechanisms holding us back? Where had the different waves of feminism played into this? I wanted to know all of those things, but I also kind of wanted a roadmap for the revolution. I wanted to spin forward. And so I started looking around. I thought that I just assumed those books were out there. And I'd read all the kind of old feminist classics. So I started rereading those, but I couldn't find a book that did what I wanted. And then at some point I found myself thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to write it myself. But the other thing that I discovered on the doorstep that was really interesting was that although at that stage, it's hard to think back only these few years ago, there appeared to be a huge consensus around progress and gender equality in the pre-Trumpian era of lost innocence, where people believed in this myth of progress that didn't really need very much effort
and linear, and you know, if you go forward, you stay forward.
So it's hard to think back there, but I started this particular bout of activism in that period, and what I discovered then is even when at that point we had the supposed consensus around the need for progress, what was holding people back was a fear of what a gender equal future might look like. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is that there's nowhere in the world that's gender equal, so no one could actually look around and say this is what it would be like. And so you would find on the doorstep that people had these really strange ideas about it all being enforced uniformity and PC gone mad, and you know, all of this idea of a kind of colourless, sexless world where women have a lot of hair. In the wrong places. So I decided with this book not only to do a kind of great big survey of where we are now and why, and but also to, in the last chapter, I take people forward to the gender equal future. And I'm a huge fan of speculative fiction, so because I think speculative fiction is incredibly important in being able to examine what could be. And so I describe Equalia. And one of the exciting things for me today about being at the unveiling of the Millicent Fawcett statue is that in my Equalia I described the unveiled Millicent Fawcett statue standing in Parliament Square. And I wrote that, that was that was the first edition of the book was published beginning of 2017, so it was a bit of a risk.
Well, you see, that's also perfect timing, but that, of course, is one of the enormous powers of fiction as well as non-fiction, which is that you can sometimes change people's minds and put people in a place that they would never go to.
Yes.
And then, really, what I think all of us say as writers is, why don't you just come in, have a chat?
Yeah.
Just have a chat. You know, revolution, it comes in all forms.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful read. I mean, it is an absolutely wonderful read, and I look forward to hundreds of editions. You're going to be updating, as all the statues now go. There's going to be many chapters with
I've got
all the faucets.
quite a lot of public art in it. So,
there we go, brilliant.
Be tested on that as the years go by.
June, what was your first choice?
Like Catherine, I also did choose my own book, which I won't talk about in this bit, I'll talk about in the next section. And we could look at it as, yes, we're being bold and confident and doing stuff that women don't normally do, but I say it's just shameless self-promotion. Proud of it.
Let's not dress it up,
The first book I chose is The Children of Blood and Bone by Tommy Adewale, is it? Adewale? Yes, yeah, Adewale. It is... Adeyemi. It is unbelievably good. I cannot tell you how good this book is. So, like what you were saying, Kit, I'm not really into sort of fantasy land and sort of sci-fi type novels. That's not my thing. I kind of like women's stories that are sort of set in sort of, at least a 200-year period. You know what I mean? Like, this is like set in 1,000 whatever. But it is so beautifully written. So she's 24, so that in itself is so annoying that at 24 she's this talented. And the best way to describe it would be Wakanda meets Harry Potter. It really is. It is literally Wakanda meets Harry Potter. And it's set in a sort of futuristic world in Nigeria. And it looks at a tribe that have been colonized by their own. So it's not colonized by another country, but by their own. And as a result, this special tribe have lost their magical powers. And within it, what happens is their secret scrolls are found, and it sort of ignites the power within this community. And they're seen as sort of witches in the country. But what's fabulous is it's all women, and it's strong women who sort of find their power as the story develops. And you just can't put it down. It's the kind of book that if you've got children, you can read it with. If you've got, younger siblings, you can read it with. If you've got grandparents, you can read it with. It just appeals to everybody. And, how I discovered it was I was in America. It's #1 of the New York Times. It's bestseller and everything. And James Cameron's bought the film rights. And it was literally everywhere. And we were talking about this backstage. Usually that sort of thing puts you off a book. Yeah. So at the time I was like, oh gosh, not another one. And then I was sent it, and I saw an interview with the author, and I thought, oh my goodness, she seems amazing. I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to read this book. Couldn't put it down. It's just
fantastic.
You have to read it. I have to.
We're convinced.
Brilliant.
We're doing
it.
It's
so good. So good.
And that's interesting that, that sort of resistance in a way to not doing it because it's the thing.
The book.
But that actually then seeing the person who had given birth to it made you want it. And that's a rather wonderful thing as well.
Yeah.
So, Kate, that was a shameless link, birth into the, you've been busy, but, I mean, obviously not in that way. So what did you pick?
Yes, well, I love what you were saying, Kate, about amplifying women's voices. So I've been thinking about amplifying women's voices in history. So one book I chose is the Marvellous Mary Beard's book about women in power that came out last year, which is absolutely fabulous. And we all love Mary and how much she's done for women's voices in the public sphere in general. Yeah. But the book is, I'm a historian of the much more modern period, so I don't know my classical history brilliantly, and she writes so well on how women were silenced in classical history, particularly in literature. that the first line of the Odyssey is about Telemachus telling Penelope to stop talking, and that Philomena has her tongue cut out, and over again through classical literature, which of course is the founding basis of so much of what's seen as our literary canon. The greats, you have to read them, is about silenced women who are told they can't speak, and one character from real life, classical history that she finds, who actually defends herself in court, and she said, well, she was dismissed as being like a man, a bit like Elizabeth I. She's like, oh, she's like a man, so that's why she could do that. And that, it's such a fascinating book to really look into how these books that are seen as the most great literature, the founding literature, are so based on the silence of women, and how this hasn't been questioned for so long. And it really struck a chord, because I really thought, my goodness, how many times when you think about classical history, and these great classical stories, is the woman silenced? Echo just becomes the echo of what a man wants to say, and you just think, my goodness, the tongue cut out. This is a recurrent trait, and we need to fight back. So I was really thought it was a great book, and I really think that the origins of what we're talking about, they start so early.
And you as a historian, and obviously I'm not a historian, but I write women's history in fiction, obviously, in between. Did it make you want to go back to many of the records that you have looked at, or the witness statements and all of those sorts of things, to see where the women had been excised, the voices that were there but maybe had now been cut out of it?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, women's voices are excised through history. They really are. I mean, they are over and over again. They're cut. We're told there are no women writers. There aren't any. And of course, there are lots. They've just all been forgotten. Loads of 16th century, not loads, but a lot. There weren't many loads of poets, but so many 16th century women poets, so many 19th century, 18th century novelists. Everyone's forgotten, and we're getting them back. But they're all there, and many of them were bestsellers. At the time, I wrote my PhD on a best-selling novelist called Eliza Haywood in the 18th century. You could barely move for her books. And of course, she's been forgotten. And I really think that's absolutely true. And another book that I was thinking of as well, in terms of the revolution it's made on popular women's history, a huge revolution, was Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire by Amanda Foreman. And previous to that, there was a resistance against writing biographies of women unless they were a queen.
Marie Antoinette.
And they couldn't. And Georgiana, who was this major 18th century figure, people said there were history books that said she was a 18th century super tramp. She was referred to an 18th century brood mare. So that's how they were referred to previously, aristocratic women. It was and she was a super tramp because, of course, she dared to go out there and campaign politically and make it. Oh my goodness! I mean, shocking. And so this is the way that she was referred to. And Amanda Foreman in '97 completely revolutionised that and said, no, her life, her politics, her world is so important, and we need to show it. And that really has been transformative in terms of saying women's voices are important. And I just think, as a historian, I've seen history change so much in the last 10 years. PhDs about women were not done, and there weren't many. Women's history just wasn't studied when I was an undergrad. And transformed. Now we've got so many PhDs, so many women. I do my course in history of women, and we still got such a long way to go. But I do think that getting out these women's voices that have been silenced throughout history is such a big job to do. And I think that it's for so long. It's almost like Parliament Square, that we've all been to Parliament Square. And I don't think any of us, and of course Caroline running through it with her dog and thought, my goodness, these are all men. I can't believe it. And yet, the amount of times we've all walked through saying, oh, there's Disraeli, oh, there's Palmerston. And we didn't think, this is outrageous. And yet, it's taken us, obviously, brilliant, 2 years, we've got the statue, but taken us 100 years to get here. So there's so much of the unconscious, we just...
Yes, the status quo is not as Catherine would say, it's not equality. No. But one of the things about the Women's Prize for Fiction, obviously in contemporary fiction, one of the purposes of setting the prize up was absolutely to create the classics of tomorrow today. Because that sense of who writes the history, who decides what is literature, was a very, very big issue. And so I think everybody on this panel, in different ways, is making sure that different women's voices are heard, and that is a terrific thing. And and it's revolutionary, whether it is fiction or poetry or dance or actually, whatever it is, it's that sort of same
absolutely
thing.
right. Who writes the history?
Who writes the history?
Question.
Yes, say the historians at the end. Kit, before you talk about your second choice, just moving on from that, listening to what Kate's saying and what we're all saying, each of us, in your anthology that you're doing for Unbound of working class voices, this is a similar project in a way, isn't it? To look around and say, well, where are the rest of us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very difficult to get published anyway. It's not easy for middle class people to get published, but there are lots of additional barriers for working class writers to get published. Some of it's self-imposed in the working class culture. Some working class cultures say writing isn't a proper job, or you've got to go out and get a job to contribute to the house because we actually need your 30 quid, we need your 50 quid, whatever it is. So some of that's from the working class communities themselves, but some of it is the publishing industry, which publishes within certain confines. The publishing industry assumes who reads, who's reading, what are you reading. If you see so many books that are trotted out within this same narrow band, and when people think about working class fiction, lots of people, but it's up north. All working class people live up north, by the way. It's gritty. It's always gritty.
Gritty.
Always.
Never glam.
In the same way, women with an opinion are always
Absolutely.
feisty. Now that is annoying. Yes.
So it's gritty.
Ambitious.
Gritty Leeds or whatever. And it's up north, and it's a tower block, and there'll be a syringe in the stairwell, and there's a pram involved, and there's a single parent, and there's heroin somewhere. So, all these things, and the nuance and the celebration and the joy and the comradeship, and also the difficulties of being working class are never explored. Not never. There are some books, but it's hard to get those books published because, generally speaking, who reads those books, who reads the manuscripts and makes the decision about being published. But the other thing about being a working class writer is the perception that you're a working class writer, you've got to tell us your story.
Yes.
So you, working class writer, cannot write about Henry VIII. That's for someone else. You've got to write about how hard it was. I was working class, I overcame it, and now look, I've got my own house. Do you know what I mean? Whatever the narrative is, whatever the
syringe.
Exactly. Without the syringe, I ditched the syringe, and now look at me now. And what we want to get away from is the fact that if you're working class, you have to constantly regurgitate your story. So, and of course...
So you can't have imagination. It
can't
has
have
to be
imagination.
recorded.
Also, you can't tackle some subjects. They're not for you. They're for the historian, they're for the romantic writer, they're for the thriller writer, or whatever. You have got this narrow band, and that narrow band is your experience, and it has to be rags to riches. It has to be how I stopped being middle class. Or, thank God for X, it helped me get out of Y. It has to be a certain narrative. And so, until we can have working class writers, male and female, writing whatever they want, I nearly swore then, thank goodness I didn't, writing whatever they want, wherever they want, and have it exactly the same chance and difficulty in being published as anybody else. That's true equality. It's what we want as women, it's what we want as people of colour. It's a level playing field, so actually our work just has to be good. It doesn't have to be good and, which is what happens so often.
Yes, and indeed, when we were setting up the Women's Prize, back in the day now, oddly, it sounds an utterly counterintuitive thing, but because everybody celebrated on the long list and then the short list are women, it is the only time that the women are being judged as artists.
Yes.
Because you cannot pull the woman card.
Yes.
So at no point can you say, well, this book is the women's book.
Yes.
And that was part of the founding principle because there'd been an experience of a beautiful novel, Kate Atkinson, behind the scenes at the museum. And in every single piece of journalism covering her being on what the Costa has become, but then it was the Whitbread, it said, and the woman on the list And of course, she was writing as an artist, as you all are and we all are. So I think that is very important, and it's part of what we're trying to celebrate with your choices, and of course
we're
the
all
list.
hyphenated. We're all described as women writers, women journalists,
yes.
women historians, like it's some separate category.
Yes, absolutely.
And
And different rules apply.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we haven't got a woman on the list, let's get one in. She might not be very good, but we've got to have a woman on the list.
I literally got rung up on Friday and asked at 11 o'clock if I could at 12 o'clock be at a debate because
They needed
the
a
woman on the panel,
woman.
on the panel about Brexit had pulled out.
So you'll do.
Yeah. Strangely, I didn't do.
That's the thing, isn't it? Over and over again, that it's seen as a panel of 5 men and 1 woman is seen as perfectly acceptable. When the other way around would be, oh my goodness,
That's why they panicked.
Yes, exactly.
She was
It
the
is-
one woman.
It is absolutely shocking, and of course, there's an amazing research, isn't there, on how to win a prize. And literally,
I have not seen this research, but I'd be quite keen to have it. That's fine. Never win a prize, me, that's for sure.
But a man, obviously, before you came on the scene, is a man writing about a man,
Yes.
and then a man writing about a woman, and then a woman writing about a man, and then the actual
there's
bottom,
like a hierarchy.
this tiny little
There's a woman writing about
a
a
woman
woman.
writing about a woman. Yeah, no translations.
And in fact, that
before you, because that was how it was.
But-
Books about men were important. Seems important.
That's right.
But it's still,
Sorry.
it's
No.
totally still like that. So when I had the bestseller with Prince Charles, I had that weird experience, which is a nice one for a writer, of people coming to me, publishers coming to me saying, we want your next book. But they assumed it would be a biography, and they assumed it would be a biography of a man. And they kept taking me out to lunch and going, who would you like to write about? And I said, Angela Merkel. And you would just see their faces fall and keep falling. And the answer, she's boring.
What?
They literally, the highest offer I got for Angela Merkel, and like I've interviewed her, I speak German, followed her, there's lots of reasons why I should have really persevered with that. I got offered, like a tenth of what I'd been offered as an advance for Prince Charles for Angela Merkel. But one of the publishers said to me, why don't you think of doing a rock star instead?
Instead of a lead, one of the major leaders of the world.
That was literally the
I hope you
response.
said because
and the
they're
only grown
boring.
up at the moment. I mean,
Also, by the word rock star, he meant a male rock
Yeah.
star.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Because otherwise,
Yes,
it would be
of
a
course.
lady rock star, wouldn't it?
A lady rock star, Chrissy Hind, I think we can all agree. Or possibly Susie Quattro. I'm showing my age there.
I just went to see the Tina Turner musical. Amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right, before we get off she is a revolutionary person in her own right. But, Kit, your second choice.
Okay, my second choice is Whatever Happened to Interracial Love by Kathleen Collins. Again, chosen as much for the author as for the book. Kathleen Collins was a civil rights activist, a poet, fantastic filmmaker, great woman, lived in the 60s, 70s, and wrote the book about interracial love was written in the 60s and 70s, short stories collection. So clever, so nuanced. It was written at a time where there was a lot of assumptions, a bit like you were saying, that race equality was going to go like this.
Yeah.
And so it was just at this time where you had really positive young students, white students, saying, do you know what, I'm going to go with a black person. Do you know what I mean? For the best reasons, they wanted to show that they were into accepting race equality. And there's stuff in there that's cringeable. It's cringeable. The stories, like, you're watching it, you're reading it like, oh, it's so bad, because out of great motives, terrible things followed. And also, she was way ahead of her time. She was writing about sex between black people and white people when it was still revolutionary in the States.
Because it was only 1968 that it became legal.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and so she's writing about all these, young people. She was a young woman at the time herself. She's dead now. And she was writing about young people saying, yeah, we're going to have interracial love and we're going to change the world. And it was clearly a disaster. Most of the time, at the time, but from this sort of positive attitude to what was going to happen to race equality. It was going to disappear. As we all thought in the 70s and 80s, we're going to just go like this and it'll, be fine. She sent those short stories off so many times and they got rejected. And then her daughter, about 5 years ago, found them, and insisted and
that's a great
fought
story.
to get them published.
Wow.
And, you know, respect to her, because, you know, these stories are just, way ahead of its time. She was ahead of her time about feminism, she was ahead of time about race, and she was ahead of a time about the intersectionality of those. And sexually, she was completely free and wanted to talk about these things. I've got so much time for her. It's a shame that she died before she knew any of these books were going to see the light of day. Really great collection.
And that is, I mean, obviously I'm going to be telling you to buy all the books from all the authors, but in terms of honouring somebody, you know, if you're going to buy one book, when you've bought all of their books, get that one. You know, I mean, that's wonderful, because that is part of getting the voice out there. Yeah. Catherine, what was your second choice?
I chose a trilogy by a Nigerian American author. We didn't compare notes in advance.
It's very similar.
And this is it's called the Binti trilogy, and she's called Nnedi Okorafor. And it's speculative fiction, you know, and I was saying, I think, you know, you see that now, everyone's who hadn't read The Handmaid's Tale has now watched a version of it. I know that so well, it drove me mad watching it because it's so brilliant, but then they changed it so they could keep it going, and I'm shouting at the TV. But the thing about it is, you know, as you see with that, as you see with other speculative fiction, it can get somewhere that other forms of fiction may not, because what it will do is it will imagine a world, and it will take away some element of this world in order to see what would be possible. So again, famously, Ursula Le Guin, The Left Hand of Darkness, she created a universe in which people swapped gender, and people could become, anyone could become pregnant when they went into a phase called chemering. You know, and
that's being reissued, actually,
yes,
with a new introduction for precisely this reason.
And these thought experiments are actually incredibly important. And Nnedi Okorafor is writing this amazing fiction where this trilogy, Binti, all of her books have these amazing heroines, which I will never use the word feisty, but I'm sure somebody somewhere has used it, for these heroines. In this case, this is a girl who has special skills, but the special skills put her outside of her own society. And so a lot of the story is about being the kind of constant outsider, and how she uses that sort of outsider perception to actually understand and eventually try and become what's known as a harmonizer. And the harmonizing, it's very interesting because there are a lot of different alien races in this, and there is the fear between alien races, but also the fear between human races. And clearly, you know, you can read this however you want to, but it's very clearly about race. It's very much about what's going on today, and yet it is absolutely mind expanding, and they're just brilliant stories. I mean, she's a great storyteller, and they're, by the way, beautifully short, which is
I don't know why you're looking at me at that moment.
See, when you talk about being a judge for the Fiction Prize, it's one of the greatest treats ever. But it's also the day where they deliver the books to you. I said, just give them to me as a PDF. Oh no, I got a crate that was literally bigger than June that arrived at my house.
You can re-gift them, send them out into the world to do their good.
But it's such a luxury, something to be able to marinate in books like that is so fantastic.
Yeah.
But what happens is, there are some books that are long because they should be long. Yeah. And then there are some books that are long because but there are some books that don't need to be, and this trilogy works brilliantly. It's kind of, in a way, like one of those old-fashioned things you might have read in parts in a magazine or something, but just fantastically gripping. And I was the third segment only came out recently, and it came out when I was doing the Women's Prize for Fiction. And so I've literally only just read the last part, and I was so happy to do so.
It's like catching up with an old friend in this series. June, what was your Second
Yes,
choice.
so my second choice is my own book, Diversify, 6 Degrees of Integration. And the reason I decided to write this book is quite similar to Catherine's reason, but mine was because of an experience that I had. So like most British television talent, I wanted to try and crack America. And so I moved to the States about 10 years ago. And I was filming in Las Vegas, and one day a young guy appeared on set who was covered head to toe in tattoos and gang markings. And it was the funniest thing. I felt really uncomfortable around him and intimidated, and it was the elephant in the room, and I was acting really strange, and he could sense it, so he was going out of his way not to seem threatening or menacing in any way. And in that moment, I was able to understand this issue from the other side, because as a black woman, I've always seen this as being as a black working class woman, I've always seen it as being on the receiving end, as opposed to doing it myself. And I was like, oh my God, that's what this is. It's when you are just comfortable with people who remind you of yourself, and you don't even realise you're doing it. And I thought, that's it. So anyway, I went over and I spoke to him. And yes, he'd made some tough choices some wrong choices in life. He'd had a pretty hard life, and fortunately our sound man was much more open-minded than me and had taken him on as an apprentice. And I thought, my goodness, if I'm feeling awkward around this kid, what chance has he got? And I thought, I want to start a conversation around this. And I want to start a conversation around it in a way that is inclusive. So the book doesn't only look at race, it looks at gender, it looks at disenfranchised men. And often, you know, where gender is at the forefront of the debate in regards to equality, and rightly so, we forget there are big chunks of the male population who are not privileged, who are completely discarded by society, and it's dangerous if we continue the way we are. I also look at disability, so even back to what we were saying about Millicent Fawcett, you know, how many of us look at Parliament Square and say, is there an overtly physically disabled person? Is there a statue of somebody that isn't able-bodied? Do we look around and say, is there a statue of somebody who is not white and middle class? And so I think what we have to be open about and what we have to realise is that intersectionality exists. There is a hierarchy of privilege and inclusion in society, and you have to be aware of where you are on that hierarchy. And yes, of course, you fight for yourself, but you better make sure you're fighting for somebody who's underneath you as well. And so what I hope this book will do is open our eyes to the fact that discrimination exists in all forms, and just how short-sighted it is. So I partnered with Oxford University because I wanted it to not only be prescriptive in terms of what we all should be doing, but also to lay out the facts and to lay out the economic argument. It's really stupid to discriminate. You know, it costs us 127 billion pounds.
Have the best people.
Yeah, just have the best people. And the country and the society that gets it right, I believe, will be the beacon and will be the model that the rest of the world wants to emulate. And
it's a call to arms.
It's a call to arms, but it's also understanding the other perspective and what it feels like to be other, whatever other you are, and how to better connect with whatever the other is for you as well.
Now, several of you have used the word intersectionality, and it's a word that's very current in debates about gender and race and ethnicity and lots of things. Would you like to define it, not just for the audience, but for all the people watching on our Facebook Live? Because I think it's one of those phrases that actually means something slightly different to everybody, but it's becoming an important word that everybody should kind of have in their lexicon, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I think
June just did a really good job of defining it. I nearly chose Kimberly Crenshaw as
Did
who
invented the term.
as
Well, you
one of my
interviewed
books.
her in your book.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So how would, you know, if it's in the dictionary, what will the dictionary
Can I
say?
give you an example of it?
Yeah,
so,
you can.
So if you look at second wave feminism, and if you look at, and often, you know, back to, you know, in terms of history and who's remembered and who isn't, Gloria Steinem, when she co-founded Ms. Magazine. She co-founded it with Dorothy Pitman Hughes, who was a black female feminist. And the two of them would go on tour together, speaking to women, because Gloria brought one section of society and Dorothy brought another. And that's how they were able to be so effective. So when you look at movements like the Black Panther movement and so on, those women were totally part of the feminist movement because of the impact that Pitman Hughes had, and obviously Angela Davis's and so on. And I think it's such a shame that hasn't been properly documented for us and this generation of feminists, because it's really important to understand that the experience of some women is not the experience of all women. And you have to understand where you are in the whole spectrum of things. And I think that's what intersectionality is. It's about knowing that discrimination is broad and that various groups are discriminated against, and there is an overlapping a lot of the time.
So it's like the pie chart.
The intersection of factors such as race or gender orientation or sexual orientation or class or disability. So that's why it's such a complex picture. And if you ignore that complexity, then you're just going to ride roughshod over. I mean, that's
something over one area of it. I always think of it as compound exclusion. So you might be excluded because you're black, then you're a woman, then you're disabled, then. And
I've been all for at one point. Gonna add. Haven't added LGBT yet, but there's still time.
Well, actually, we've only got about 10 minutes left.
So it's where all of those things impact on your life, and there are people where every form of discrimination is going to impact on you at the same time. That's the. How do you describe that? How do you can fix that bit? I might be able to fix that bit. I can't fix that.
But I still have that
I've still got that. I'm still left with that.
So you're left with that. And actually, Kate, what you were saying about the sorts of discrimination and the language and the belittling and the erasing out, that it happens to the women right at the top as well, who appear to have a voice, but they don't either. So this actually is the same thing, that we should judge all of it. So what is your final choice?
My final choice is a book I'm sure everyone in the room has bought and read, which was last year's winner, which was Naomi Alderman's The Power. Brilliant book, absolutely fabulous, an absolute sort of, bombshell of a book, so gripping and really absolutely turns everything on its head, speaks about violence, speaks about class, speaks about questions about young and old as well, another kind of section of intersectionality. And I mean, it's an absolute, anyone who hasn't read it, I'm sure that you all have, but anyone who hasn't read it, I can't recommend it enough. And I really think that the characters are amazing, the story is amazing, but the overall theme, the question of turning the society on its head so women have the power, and how terrifying it's found to be, and the complete sort of breakdown of the patriarchy, it's completely brilliantly evoked. So that was my choice, and I absolutely love it.
And it's very interesting because speculative fiction's come up quite a lot this evening. But the fiction that you write, historical fiction, and obviously that I write as well, but in your books, there is also a sense, I think, in historical fiction of sometimes you can actually put the record straight. It isn't about imagining how you can change, but actually often things were not. The men were there and the women were there. And you do that with your fiction as well as your biographies, don't you? You sort of look at what real women's lives really were like.
Well, I mean, so do you, Kate.
Well, indeed I do.
Coming from you, because you show these determined, incredible heroines, because there is a perception that women in the past were only allowed to be servants or stay-at-home mothers, kind of not stay-at-home mothers, but kind of angels in the house in the Victorian times. Because being a stay-at-home mum is one of the most important things we can do. But the kind of angels in the house were restricted, could never go out, and whereas you had in the Victorian period women bus conductors, women factory inspectors, women votes for women campaigners. And so I think in my trilogy about the Anglo-German family, I was so fascinated, number one, by what it feels like to be a foreigner, suddenly overnight becoming enemy number one in in 1914, because previously Germans were everyone's best friend. Everyone thought Germans were the European ally, and suddenly overnight everyone hated them, and people had to leave the country, and the best waiters in the country and waitresses were seen as German, and the newspapers published a handy guide saying if your waiter says he's Swiss, ask to check his passport.
Wow.
Check that out. And suddenly there was this panic about Germans. And so I wrote about the family who were Anglo-German, but I also wanted to write so much about women's contribution to the war effort, because so much of it was about how it affected men, and how war was about men and about the loss of male sacrifice. And I want to talk about women's sacrifice, about women who were ambulance drivers, who were nurses, who were domestics, who were cleaners, women who kept Britain going while men were away, and women at home who had to wait and had to suffer and had to keep the family together. And I think the sacrifice of that generation cannot be understated, and obviously so much of it went into the fact that the vote was achieved for women over 30 in 1918. But I wanted to write about the kind of so you're partly German and you're partly a woman, and you're completely sort of excluded, and have to actually fight to have a voice, and fight to see what power you can get. So that's and they just finished with they just finished the book, and the proofs went off on Sunday. So I was very very grateful that the book came on Monday and everything like that. Thanks to them for waiting. So that went off, and in that the character does the final most powerful act that I absolutely had to give her. So I gave her the power. Gave her a bit like Naomi's power. I gave her the power.
That is brilliant, and I think that is also everything that we are all saying and thinking and listening to one another. Exactly what you say, that one of the reasons that I'm writing about the 16th century, I'm writing about Huguenot-Catholic conflict, but it's actually a story of women and families, is that one of the biggest things that many of the women at the beginning of the wars were attracted to Protestantism was because they were allowed to read and express an opinion. Whereas before in the Catholic Church it was sit down and be quiet. And I just thought that, again, what you have all done with the books that you've shared with the audience, and what we all do as writers, hopefully, and I'm sure there are many other writers in the room, is the idea of sharing the stories, because if there's enough of them, it's a wave, and you can't ignore it. So you are now going to be the wave, ladies and gentlemen, in that we have some time for some questions. So we've got a couple of microphones, and so if anybody wants to throw their hand up.
And can I say one thing? Kate's book is about to come out.
Yes.
Kate's brilliant book is about to come out.
Yes.
Absolutely thrilling, and amazing women's lives and women's voices in there. So my copy is on order. I'm very excited about reading it. Can't wait to read it. So very excited about that.
Thank you very much. Yes. I'm following Jude. Yes. 3rd of May, Burning Chambers. Order from Waterstones. Nice pictures in it. Special edition. Anyway, there we are. So I feel I'm taking a leaf out of these books here. I'm becoming more bold as I sit on this platform with you guys. So, ladies and gents, any questions? Put your hand up, or just something that you'd like to share with the audience of a book that means something to you in this area. Lady there, thank you very much. Microphone's just coming.
I have a question, a general question. When we are talking about women and black women and disabled and lesbians, and we are cutting it again and again and again and again. And the big issue eventually is, where is a human being as a human being? Because I think eventually that's where we want to go, which is much more primordial than everything else. There is eventually, we are all human beings, and I think eventually that's what we want to get to.
Yes,
and
yes.
Don't you think that there is a problem with the way we go there? Because the way we're trying to get there is actually to sectionize more and more, because we need to, maybe.
Yes,
It's like Black Lives Matters and the whole dispute in the United States. What do you mean, all life matters? But all life matters, of course, but it doesn't solve the problem of Black Lives Matter. But eventually you want really to get there. So how do we get there with all this making emphasis on, having a woman's statue there? Or writing about how do you get from this direction to get to the other direction of...
Absolutely. I think that's a very good question, because it is something that exercises lots of people, and I think everybody would like to answer this question. So, ladies,
Well,
she who shouts loudest.
Can I quickly just say, years and years ago, perhaps 25 years ago, I used to work in what was called then race equality. And just like you said, there was the perception that eventually, because I ran a department, race equality department, eventually I was going to be so good, and we were all going to be so good at our jobs, that race equality was going to be a thing of the past, that we would be able to get that department and put it in the bin, because we were going to go forward positively and we were going to be able to do away with identifying race, because it was going to be this beautiful utopia where no one, race didn't matter because we were all so woke. Look where we are. Look where we are today. Windrush, Trump, and I won't swear, but Trump.
That is swearing.
That's swearing. We are
Immigration
further
panics.
back, in my view, we are further back than we were when I used to work in that department. So until we are in that utopia, and if we ever get there, and pray that we do, we will have to continue to say women and all the other groups, without going into them, with all the other groups that are oppressed, that do not have a fair crack of the whip, we will need to name and advocate on behalf of certain groups. We have to do it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I mean, because I've been building a political party that is actually an intersectional party, this is something that we grapple with on a daily basis. And what you have to do is, in recognising the way in which those different factors intersect, it's not pitting people against each other, it's doing exactly the opposite of that. And the only time, in fact, that I find myself on panels with people shouting at me saying, identity politics, it's destroying the left. Do you know what? Those are nearly always posh white men. And they have no sense of where they're speaking from, that they do not see, that exactly as Kit has just said, that if these things do not happen without us illuminating them, without us amplifying the voices, without us explaining, without us developing policies that actually are sensitive to those differences. Yes, we absolutely are all, one of the other things we've all been saying, and it's what June's research shows, what my research in my book shows, is that we would all be better off, including, funnily enough, those privileged white men, if we could get to a point of true diversity, true equality. But we're not going to get there unless we recognise and work with those differences.
Thank you. June?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's a wonderful question, so thank you for it. The second piece, I think what we have to understand is that everybody has a different lived experience, and unfortunately, we live in a society that boxes people and decides who you are based on what box you come in. And I think the reason why it's really important to have those distinctions at the moment is because there are certain things that your experience, I don't know where you're from originally, that I wouldn't have any understanding of some of the things you've experienced, and you wouldn't have any understanding of some of the things I've experienced. It's like being in an apartment building, and some people are on the penthouse and they have the most amazing view. If you're on the ground floor, you have no idea what that penthouse is like. And actually, if you're at the penthouse, you just go past the ground floor. And I think that's why it's so important to make sure that we give people the outlet to express themselves and to make people understand what it feels like to be them in this society with the current thinking we have, and why we need to change our thinking so that everybody has a fair shot. So I don't think it is dividing us. It is about being honest that it's not fair. And until it is, we've got to keep talking.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's all I would say.
Kate?
Yes, absolutely. And I great question. And it's interesting,
Great question.
the word you used, humanity and being a human being, because for a long time, humanity was a man. Humanity were male beings. And that's been so striking that it was male in history, male experience was what stood for everyone else's. And that was what was important. And, who was reading books about pregnancy? Oh, no. And I mean, I've got a 6-year-old, and children's culture has been a revelation to me. I was just saying that in the, you know, there's the schemes they have to try and work out what reading age you are. So they take you through a load of sentences, a bit like an eye test. And one of them, I think this was like 13 or something, very hard words for small, particulars of eminent men can be found in the encyclopedia. And of course, what they meant was particulars of eminent people, you mean, but it's an eminent men, because that's always, you know, that was meant to be for a long time, that was the collective word for men and women, wasn't it? Men.
For everyone.
And you know, when you look at so many kids' books, for little kids, all the bears, all the elephants, all the dogs, everything, all the Octonauts, all the, Paw Patrol, everything. I don't want to, but I'm sure none of you have got small children, you don't know too much about Paw Patrol. Yes. But it's all this male experience over and over again, and that is meant to be just standing straight for children. And so it is. I think absolutely we should look at those human beings. But for so long, what has been a human being has been a white elite man of the Western, especially sort of the winner of the British Empire, as we might put it. Yeah. And that, you know, the white, that so much of the empire was based on the fact that white male experience must be taken to the rest of the world, to the black people, and they must be just like the white men. So I think that you're absolutely right that we all should be human beings, but I think that for so long we've seen humanity as men and male even in fiction. You know, often there was that thing, wasn't it, that a man who writes domestic fiction is seen as a great writer, but a woman who writes about domestic fiction or the school run or the home life is that's
it's not literature.
It's not literature. It's not literature. So I think one day I hope in the future we will have a world, and when we talk about humanity,
which is what we all
we're
want.
talking about,
Which is what we're
everyone,
all,
the working class experience, the black women's experience, the non-able-bodied experience, and the LGBT experience, and I really hope, you know, gender fluidity seems to me, when I talk to my students, is something that is much more current than it was when I was at university.
Yes.
I think we're really moving forward in that way.
You know, my lovely dad, who is now gone sadly, and he was, you know, a white privileged man, a middle class man, and he once said to me, darling, we don't need to all look the same, but we should all sit at the same table.
Precisely.
And that was how I was brought up. That you listen to whoever it is. You don't make any judgment on those outside things, because why does that matter? You know, it's the heart that matters, you know.
Can I say one thing that is revolutionary that we are doing? We are having a conversation here where we're basically all agreeing with each other. we are used to the entire discourse around this being framed as polar, punch-ups.
Women having cat fights. Women writers are meant to beat each other up outside bookshops.
Yes. But you see, I did try to get a man to talk about Brexit, but nobody would come on. Is there another question? You were all looking quite like you were enjoying listening. You don't have to have a question, because I will finish off with one of our own questions. Right, you missed a chance, but you can ask over at the table. To finish up, you've shared with the audience, and with me actually, I was horrified at the numbers of books I didn't know on that list, so thank you as well from me. We've talked about all sorts of things this evening, exactly what we hoped. You've recommended some brilliant books. Ooh! You know, that are available and people will be able to buy them. To finish up, the sense of what I've picked out from you is that we all can be quiet revolutionaries in our own way, or we can be loud if that's us. But what I'm getting from all of you is, in a way, that we can all be revolutionary, but we must be ourselves to do it.
Yes.
Do you want to just each say something just to finish on that, the idea of how any of us might affect change? It doesn't have to be ripping down the barricades necessarily.
Yes.
That's a disastrous question. It silences the panel.
It's a great question, because we are all on this panel very different, with very different backgrounds, and yet all passionate to get to the same place. We're all passionate about getting to the same place eventually, but we will have different routes to it. And I think the only way we can do that is to talk about our experience of life and saying, you know, this is my experience and this is my passion, and you're going to have a different passion as well as my passion. And I think it is about, if you like, intersectionality of intent. You know, that we not only have of exclusion, but there's loads of ways in which my interests will converge with everyone's interests here, because we are all heading for humankind. You know, we do want to be at that place, not where we don't see race and we don't see gender, just that it doesn't affect you disastrously, which is what happens now. So I don't want to live in a colourblind world at all. No. I want to live in a world that has got colour and has got difference, and that those differences are absolutely celebrated and wonderful, not a cause for you being left out of something.
Yeah, lovely.
Sorry, a bit long.
Catherine, it was beautiful though. Yeah.
One of the other things we're all agreeing with, in a sense, is that action is necessary, whatever that action looks like. We do not believe in linear progress. We do not believe that this is going to happen without us doing things. So the question that I have for everybody in the room and the rest of the panel is, what is it that you think you can do? You know, in creating a political party, what I was trying to do was give people one mechanism for engaging with change. But there are many others. Obviously, I think it's a great one. Join the Women's Equality Party. Vote for us.
And we are back to shameless.
Vote for us on Monday. Yeah.
Go on,
yes,
anything
totally
else?
shameless.
No, it's good. There's no shame here. No shame in a bookshop.
But there is such an urgency to this, because it isn't just that we will not go forward without the effort. It is that there are trumps. That there are trumps in this country, that there are people who are literally rolling back the rights and protections we thought were secure. So, yes, shameless self-promotion for party. I don't think that's self-promotion, by the way. Party promotion. Party political broadcast.
That sounds now like buy one, get one free. I think we're going down a very evil route now.
But I seriously think that everybody can find things to do to make a difference, whatever it is, but that we cannot not do that.
Yeah. June?
I think one thing that I'd like you all to do is, who is the person that you know that is the other? So who's the person at the office that doesn't really get on with everybody else, who's a bit excluded, who's slightly isolated? Reach out to that person. You know, that little one thing that you do in your life can not only change their lives, but also give you confidence in realizing how you can bring about change. If you change that person's experience, there's no way that's not going to benefit you. So I would say, all of you, when you go to work tomorrow, or to your neighbour, whoever it is, reach out.
Lovely and doable.
I
Kate?
agree. Yes, well, when I was a little girl, I used to steal my grandma's Women's Own magazine and read the problem pages. And I read, a problem that I read has apart from learning that people over 40 want to kind of have relationships, was a shock to me, because I thought it'd stop. They kind of stop
over
at 20.
40?
I know, but it's
22, isn't it?
But there was this man who'd written in who worked in an office, and he said that he worked in an office, and one of the other men in the office was gay, and this was at the height of, there was the HIV kind of AIDS panic, and this man who was gay had brought in a cake, and he'd offered it around the whole office, and no one had taken a piece of the cake, and it's never left me. I think I was only a little girl, I didn't read this magazine at all. I was when my grandma wasn't looking, and that has really stayed with me, that they didn't touch that cake. And I just think the importance of kindness and the importance of, it's a truism, but I think we don't know when you meet someone what battles they're fighting. Even when they might look like they've got everything, or that they don't know what battles people are fighting. I think the importance of trying to be kind, and just what you said, trying to think about how we can help people of course, the problem page writer wrote about, get into being more cakes and eat them all, because you can't catch HIV or AIDS from a cake. But it was heartbreaking, and how many offices must that happen throughout the world? Similar things, exactly similar things, versions of that. Someone's birthday is very sad because we see something blocks our vision of them as a human being. Whether it's HIV status, AIDS status, LGBT, whether it's colour, whether it's gender, whether it's disability, whether it's so many things, and class, and I just think it's going to be a little by little that we can try and.
I think that's a wonderful note on which to end. I think one of the things about books, we all feel this, and we do have to end, so we will talk over there. But what we will be able to do is all the books that have been talked about tonight are here available to look at or buy if you want to. All of the books by the panellists are available, and they are very happy to sign their own books. They can't sign other people's books and each other's, depending on all the rest of it. We're here as part of the week. We're here all week. Tomorrow at lunchtime and Thursday at lunchtime, actors. Wonderful actors Tori Allen Martin and Jim Rastel will be reading extracts from each of the 6 shortlisted novels. It's an extraordinary shortlist. Some really exquisite, hard-hitting books this year, so that you can get a taste and you can come and you can have a sandwich and a Baileys and just listen to a little bit. I know, lunchtime Baileys, but it is great. Trust me, you'll love it if you do it. On Thursday night, we have a celebration of Wuthering Heights for the 200th anniversary of Emily Bronte's birth, the novel that for many of us was the novel that made it possible for us to be writers, certainly for me. And on Friday, we have an event called Queens of Comedy. All of the events are available. Tomorrow night is a cocktail-making thing, which will be amazing. And as part of that, you will discover when we finish this evening, the bar will stay open. Do please stay, look around the bookshop, enjoy another Baileys. But they have very kindly, firstly, every night there is a different person, an artist, a creative artist in drink and food, part of the Treat Collective. And tonight we have Lily Vanilli, and she is renowned for her delicious and bespoke... Hello, Lily! East London baker, and she has brought her expertise to the Baileys Treat Collective. And the thing that is wonderful is not only are there little miniatures that you can have, including a dairy-free Baileys, which is... My world is turned upside down now. But most extraordinarily, when you finish here, you will discover that there are vegan chocolate brownies. And they are for you, ladies and gentlemen. So the cocktail night is tomorrow, but thank you very much, Lily, and there'll be a different person here the other night.
Where are these
can I finally say thank you?
Can I say thank you to Kate for being
Oh, no.
You've been absolutely amazing. And you've completely kept us to time, because you would have talked all night if it wasn't for you. So we're very grateful.
Thank you.
You're fabulous. For everything that you do for the Women's Prize. So
Thank you, Kate.
It was all thanks to you. So
Lovely. Well, you're very kind.
You started a movement.
And thank you to Baileys. Thank you to Deloitte and to NatWest, who are our new sponsors. Thank you to you, the audience. And very much thank you to Waterstones and the team. See you all, hopefully tomorrow lunchtime, tomorrow evening, or at my own event in another Waterstones on the 3rd of May. There we go. Done it. Thank you very much. That's very lovely. Yeah.